All right, everybody, there they are. It's Cassel, it's Phil Perry, and before we get into the pod, just want to mention that we are now up to 104,000 subscribers. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Tell a friend. Boys, the Patriots are 6-6. They've lost 2 straight. If they lose against the Cardinals, they dip below 500. Every game from here on out will be a game in which they're playing a team that's either hotter than them or better than them or hotter and better. Mm-hmm. And it almost becomes wait till next year before we're even 10 days from Christmas. So, Matt, basically, we're doing an autopsy while the patient is still alive. And that's no fun. What's it like when a season is kind of on the edge like this and people are scrutinizing what does it all mean?
Well, you know what? There's still opportunity there. And as a team, and the focus for you've got to be one of those teams that go in and say, we still have an opportunity. We've got to take it one game at a time. I remember when I was with the Patriots in 2008 and we were sitting at 7-5 late in the season, and we went on a 4-game win streak and ended up that season at 11-5. Now, we didn't get into the playoffs, and there was a lot of reasons for that, obviously. But at the end of the day, you just got to grind it out. And there are going to be teams that you see on the schedule and you say, yes, this is a better team than we are. But at the same time, the Patriots can't worry about the end of the year schedule. They got to take care of business right now. And it truly is one of those mentalities. It's hard to stay in that box of one game at a time, but that's what you have to do. You got to focus on getting one win, stacking them together, because they're not completely out of this playoff picture. Now, I know it looks like a long shot to everybody on the outside. That's what the narrative is going to be. But at the end of the day, for the Patriots, the players, the coaches, everybody else, it's a one-game season from this point on.
I agree with Matt. I'm not really sure what other choice they have, to be quite honest with you. If you're Bill Belichick and you are planning on coaching this team for the foreseeable future, and you do want to maintain whatever it is that you can in terms of the culture that you've tried to establish here over the last 20 years, all you can do is take the first step that's right in front of you, which is try to beat the Cardinals. And maybe making the playoffs is a long shot. I would say it is. But if you're Bill Belichick, or if you're anybody on this team that cares about the future of this team, there's really no other way to approach it, to me, than to continue to try to set the bar high, win this game, and move on from there, Tom. I think big picture, it is too daunting to try to make the postseason and try to make something really significant of this season. But you certainly can't do anything with this season if you don't win this game that's right in front of you.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is there's parallel streets. While you are 6-6 and you're taking a plane to Arizona and you're going to stay out there for a week, you're also saying, why are we here? How did this happen? And what's it going to mean if we aren't able to secure this vital game, which we're pouring our hearts and souls into? There's time for reflection, I think. And I guess for Matt, just real quick, before we get to some of Bill's answers from this week, is it hard to block out those questions, or should you welcome them in of why are we here in facing this kind of adversity?
Right. I mean, you can ask that question, but I think that a lot of people outside that building are going to be asking the question, but the focal point for the team is going to be this week, right now, this one game that we've got to go out and win, because there's time for reflection, but it's not right now. And during the bye week, you have a little bit of time for reflection. Maybe during those Thursday night games when you get an extended weekend, you can go back and reflect a little bit. What could we do better, and maybe make some subtle adjustments. But at this point in the season, you are who you are. You've got to make the changes that you need to do to be successful this week. You can't just be dwelling on the fact that you're 6-6 right now. And again, I go back to that season in 2008 when we're sitting at 7-5, and everybody's saying, well, you know, it's a long shot maybe to make the playoffs. They've got to win 4 straight. We were able to do it, but these same conversations were coming up, and there's a parallel here because we had a West Coast trip late in that season as well, where we went out and played Seattle and we played Oakland, and we stayed out there as well. So again, it's sometimes one of those situations for this team right now. When they go to Arizona, they get out of New England and they just have ball to focus on, and that's what they're doing right now, is maybe a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there's a saying in baseball: momentum only lasts until the next day's starting pitcher. Meaning, once you get into the game and things start going well, everything else becomes irrelevant. Also, too, though, if things don't go well, look, Mac Jones flipping out on the sideline, it's not going to happen in week 1, 2, or 3, but it will happen in game 12 if he's seen that movie before and frustration hits a level. So that's why I think they're at kind of a tenuous spot. Phil, when it comes to the overall picture, you did do a good job of pushing Bill Belichick this week on what he likes about his offense, because he countered that he likes the way it's set up and his involvement in it on WEEI earlier this week. He didn't really give you an answer. Andrew Callahan from the Herald tried again to put a finer point on it with Bill. Here was what happened on Zoom when Andrew tried to put a finer point on it.
Yeah, look, I'm not saying that we can't improve in every area, because we can. And we'll continue to try to do that. And so that's across the board. Players, plays, coaches, decisions, etc. Like, we're always trying to improve all the time. We'll continue to do that. So that's where we are. That's where we have been. That's probably where we always will be. It's always trying to do a little bit better and try to find the best ways to be successful.
Yeah, I think it's more the question of, the positive things that are coming out from the current system in place. I understand you're always trying to get better, always doing things with the intention to win. Where are you encouraged within the current offensive system?
Yeah, and again, success comes through consistency, and that's really what we're trying to build towards. Always more consistency, more production, and we'll continue to try to work towards that.
Earlier this week, Phil, Bill was talking about, hey, consistency, and if we just do what we do, but do it better and more consistently, we'll be fine. And you mentioned that is what every team can say. Every team has good plays here and there, and every team has good players. But intelligence, consistency, and all of that is key. Even in the running game, if you want to hang your hat on the running game and you're Bill Belichick and the Patriots, you also have to acknowledge that Ramondre Stevenson gets hit behind the line of scrimmage at an exorbitant amount. So you have a good running back, but you might not really even have a good running game. So what's your reaction, Phil, to Bill's stance in December of, hey, man, we have good plays. We just need to do it a little bit more consistently? I mean, that's a loser's lament.
I think it just tells you how desperate they are to try to grasp onto something positive, something that they can build on. Because I think really since the summer, they've been looking for that. They've been looking for an identity. They've been trying to figure out what they're good at. And I think a lot of people would say, well, what they might be good at is, leaning on that guy, Ramondre Stevenson, and using that power run game and throwing play action off that. I've heard Cassel talk about these things. I know Matt feels strongly about their potential for moving the ball that way. But to your point, Tom, they really haven't been a good running game. And a lot of metrics, through this point of the season now, they are a bottom 10 running game in terms of their efficiency. Now, do they have a better running back than that? Yes. Do they have a better running, blocking offensive line? I'm not sure, because they've been so up and down. So I think the answers that we're getting from Bill Belichick right now, Matt, are really founded in even he is looking for the bright side of a situation where it's really difficult to find that thing.
Right. And if you're going to dig yourself out of this hole that you've gotten yourself into, I mean, the only way to do it is to try to find consistency. And they haven't had consistent play in the offensive line in particular. There's been a lot of moving parts, and there's been a lot of guys rotating in. And so that definitely has had an impact. They've gone up against some really good defensive units. That's had an impact. But to sit there and say, well, I can't stand our offense and they all suck and we suck in a lot of different areas, that's not going to do anything for anybody. So when you go into those meetings and you approach it, you've got to look for consistency, and that's in the run game, that's in the pass game, that's in spacing, that's consistent play by Mac Jones. Even something as simplistic as we saw in last game as ball handling issue on the first third down of the game. I mean, those are fundamental plays that you have to get done in that type of situation. So that's what he's talking about in consistency. That's the message to the team this week is, guys, look, it hasn't looked really good this season, and there has been parts where we have done things well, but we have to do things better collectively, from the coaching staff to the players, and everybody's got to take accountability and get out there and get it done. But we have another opportunity this week against the Cardinals to go out and do that.
You know what sucks is there are so many possible causes. Could be penalties. Well, why was the penalty there? Was it a mental error or was it a physical error? Was it a coaching error and the player wasn't prepared necessarily, or was it just a player error? Could be a breakdown. Did that guy not get the play? Was he not coached on the footwork there? Did he get the play, but he's physically unable to perform it? There's an injury. Well, is the player who's in now incapable of executing at a level because he wasn't coached to that level, or because the general manager made a wrong assumption in putting that player and expecting that from him? There's so many tiers to everything. He's, Charlie Weis, we'll get to it in a second, but Charlie Weis lamenting that there's not an explosive wide receiver. To me, that's about ninth down the list. Tell me first, and ninth exaggerates. Tell me first, are you able to give your competent quarterback a moment to survey? And then tell me whether or not you're being left in a straitjacket by the wide receiver personnel. That's what I think has to be so maddening for whether it's coaching staff or ownership or players, to be in December and not be able to pinpoint where this went sideways. Was it players? Was it depth? Was it coaching? Was it execution? That's what's so hard, Phil, I think.
Yeah, I think if you were to ask Bill Belichick and give him some truth serum, just based on some of the things that I've heard from him over the last week or so, I think he would start with the offensive line and the depth there.
Why did the offensive line stink? Does he have the wrong guys there? Have the guys that he brought in decided not to play at a level that they should? Are they hamstrung by injuries? That's what I think is the next level to it.
And I think all of those things have happened to that unit. But he's talking about right after the game, when I'm asking about third down, do you have to throw short because of how your offensive line situated? You're starting Connor McDermott at right tackle. Trent Brown can't even warm up. He's so sick, and you have to start him at left tackle. And he acknowledges, which is rare for him, yeah, we're working around some things there. And then earlier this week, when Karen Gregian asks him if the reason they can't be more aggressive is related to anything in particular, he talks about how, well, if your team isn't physically able to handle certain assignments or certain schemes, then we can't do those. And that, to me, when he's talking about if you can't physically do something, that's about pass protection, Matt. I don't think he's saying, well, Mac Jones physically can't get the ball down the field. I think it all comes back to the offensive line for Bill Belichick. And that comes back to Tom's point, his decisions in terms of the depth there and his decisions in terms of who he has coaching that group this year, which is a guy who's never done it before.
Right. And as a play caller, you're sitting there and you're trying to come up with the game plan. We talk about explosive plays. We talk about shots. And I was talking to Tommy before we started this podcast, and I said, look, the easiest form to do it is a 5-step drop and try to throw a go. Because at the end of the day, when you're looking at this offensive line and how it's constructed right now and the missing pieces, so to speak, it's hard to sit back there and say, hey, let's play action. Let's drop back. Well, let's call the post over the top with a deep crosser and think that Mac Jones is going to have enough time to throw the ball down the field and hold on the ball, because it takes all those guys up front to do their job. If you're not winning up front, controlling the line of scrimmage, it is hard to get the ball down the field. So what does that do to a play caller? It somewhat handicaps you. You've got to call quick game. You've got to call more screens. You got to rely on the possession passing game, because you're worried about a drive killing play like a sack, because it has been very evident that these guys have struggled to really be able to block these elite pass rushing groups that they've gone up against this season. And that's an issue. So we talk about getting explosive. We talk about all these different plays, but at the same time, you have to look at the group that you have and say, hey, we've got to make the best of what we have right now. And we also have to construct a game plan to protect our quarterback, but also to put ourselves in the position to be successful on a play in, play out, get ahead of down and distance. It's not going to be always taking those shots down the field.
I love Matt's explanation too. When we were talking about, okay, if you want to do that, if you want to throw a balloon down the sideline and let Devontae Parker go and get it, well, that balloon's going to have to travel 35, 40 yards in the air past the line of scrimmage. Right. That's going to give, if they're playing two high safeties, it's like going over the field to fly ball if you're one of the safeties. So you're throwing it to double coverage. The ball has to be really well placed, closer to the sideline than the middle. And the player has to win the jump ball against probably two guys. Now, you can try the deep out that is always going to be there, that we saw David Givens and Julian Edelman and, the turkey hole that – who the hell used to talk about the turkey hole? Gruden, I think.
Oh, the
out on the sideline behind
the whole shot.
Yeah, but that takes a second to develop as well, does it not?
It does, because again, when you're usually throwing a hole shot, you've got the slot receiver running an inside seam that he's bending it, trying to manipulate that safety. And then you've got the hole shot on the outside of the cloud cover in which you're forcing outside release and getting into that hole. But again, that ball's got to get up and down. You also have to evaluate the safety. So does he kind of commit to that inside seam? Does he play it safe where the hole shot is out of the picture? So it takes a moment to develop. So that's the easiest form of taking a shot. And when we see some of these teams that are taking shots down the field and getting the ball down the field, those plays take time to develop. And again, if you don't have the protection to do so, you're just shooting yourself in the foot, because those are drive killers every time if you get sacked.
And think about what we're talking about too. We're talking about pushing the ball down the field against two high safeties. Well, what the Patriots would always do when they see two high safeties, if they had a really great running game that they felt like they could lean on, they would hand it off, right? You see that guy out of the box, just give it to the running back and let him go. But right now, I'm just looking at it according to The Athletic in terms of expected points added per rush. So this is an advanced analytical stat that Matt Cassel loves.
Love
They're
this stat.
22nd in the league, 22nd in the league in terms of EPA per rush this season. So they can't feel good about the run game. They can't feel good about the pass game, the pass protection. I don't know how you win with that.
And if you can't get that safety to rotate down and the other team is saying, look, they good back, but God, we're going to be able to, because we have a great defensive line and fast linebackers. So we don't even have to drop anybody down against Ramondre Stevenson. You never get that single high safety, which means you never have the opportunity to exploit Devontae Parker on the edge, one-on-one, truly one-on-one. But what my concern, Phil, is when I hear Bill answer Curran or you in the post game and cite, man, we were strapped. I've seen this team strapped. I've seen Brian Stork at left tackle. I've seen this team win with Russ Hochstein in a Super Bowl and Tom Ashworth in Super Bowls and guys, Grant Williams in a Super Bowl at left tackle and Mike Compton zipping in and out. It's not the cover that Bill thinks that it should be, this injuries, and I can feel him already starting to use it as a shield. Well, what are we supposed to do? 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 Saw you do it before. We're paying you $20 million a year. I get it. We understand you lost Dante Scarnecchia and you lost another, Carmen Brasillo went out west. But you need to create a better staff, Bill. You have too few guys doing too many jobs, and the jobs that you're asking those guys to do, they're really not that well inclined to do. I want to move on to one other thing here, too. It's the Charlie Weis conversation, where he spoke this week about what the Patriots' number one problem was. And he fingered wide receiver one. Here's Charlie talking to Brian Barrett from the Off the Pike Ringer podcast.
Well, I really like Jacoby Myers as a receiver, but realistically, tell me who the number one receiver is that you're concerned with every time you go to play against New England.
That's probably it, right? I mean, there's not a lot of guys that scare you.
Well, therein lies the biggest problem. I mean, you could sit there and talk about Mac Jones and you could talk about Matt Patricia, but at the end of the day, when you watch the good teams play and you see who's out there, you know, even the Jets now, you look at the receivers now, they have good receivers. They do. You go against Buffalo, they have good receivers. You go against Miami, they have good receivers. And I'm not saying that the receivers from New England aren't any good, but I'm saying I don't think any of those teams are trading their receivers for the Patriot receivers.
Hey, my feeling on this, if you don't start at the offensive line and say, I don't know why they can't block enough, then WTF. What are we doing? You got no slot receiver traditionally. You opted to not include that, a little water bug. You have no sub back who's elusive. I'd start there before I start with Kendrick Bourne, Devontae Parker, Nelson Aguilar, Tyquan Thornton, and Jacoby Myers. I would start at those roster decisions. You get them to run routes in a crisp way that they're supposed to, so it's timed up. And the execution and precision is what you're looking for. And you get that by having an offensive coordinator and a quarterback coach and a play caller and an offensive line coach and a wide receivers coach who has them in synchronicity. You don't start with, wow, he's not good enough. You start with the foundation. Troy Brown and Charles Johnson Nobody was trading wide receivers, Charlie, for them in 2001. When Deion Branch and David Givens, I don't think a lot of teams were doing that in Deion Branch's second year, nor trading for David Givens, Freddie Coleman in 2001. I mean, this is disingenuous to me, and it's an effort to protect the coaching staff, which, of course, the coaching staff is led by a guy who's also the general manager. So who's to blame? It's not the wide receivers. It's the coaching of the players. Sorry.
I do think, right, like an elite wide receiver in the situation they have right now would help. It would help. There's no question. When you have an offensive line that's
but that's a wish list item that's 4 or 5 down, I think.
I think what we've all said about Mac Jones, even before he was drafted, if this is how you want to continue to run your offense, right, with a pocket passer and operate this way, timing, rhythm-based passing game, you need a good situation for that player. You need to have them protected. You need to have a play caller who understands how to attack opposing defenses, and you need to have playmakers. And, I think right now, the playmakers that Mac Jones has is probably, of those 3 Ps I just listed, protection, play caller, and playmakers, I think the playmakers are probably number 1 on that list in terms of the strengths, in terms of the things that this offense actually has going for it. So I'm not sure that we should list it at the top of the list. It's on the list, and I would grant Charlie that, but it's not at the top.
Right. It's exaggerating.
Right. I mean, it's something that when you look out there and you have a Tyreek Hill or somebody like that, you're sitting there as a quarterback saying, yeah, let's go. But you even saw Miami Dolphins. They're missing their starting 2 tackles last week against a good defense with the 49ers. And Tua, who has, for all accounts, have had an MVP type season, was out of sorts. He was awful in that game. He was missing throws behind people, over people, all those things. So as successful as that offense been, when you take that component of a solid offensive line out of it, I mean, when he was feeling the pressure, feeling that sense of urgency, he wasn't himself. And it starts with the offensive line. Every successful offense starts with protection, being able to get to the next level in the run game, doing all that stuff. And when you don't have an offensive line that can block consistently, control the line of scrimmage, especially during pass protection, it doesn't matter who you have on the outside. The quarterback's not going to have time to deliver the ball.
I would just say this too, Tom. They were a top 10 offense last year, and the weapons have gotten better. They added Devontae Parker. Yeah. They drafted Tyquan Thornton in the 2nd round. They got a bunch of second-year Patriots that, all things being equal, should be better this year than they were last year, just based on a little bit more familiarity. And Mac Jones is in his 2nd year, should have more familiarity with what defenses are throwing at him. So they've upgraded offensively, and they're still where they are in terms of just about every offensive ranking compared to last year.
The one thing I'd say about that, though, but I'd say this, the one thing that you look at last year compared to this year, you look at the strength of schedule. It's changed dramatically. They have been playing one of the toughest schedules in all of the NFL, comparatively speaking, to what it was last year. So the defensive units that they're going up against, it's a grind to go up against these defensive units week in and week out. And so that might be something that you can look at as well, that a lot of people aren't taking into account. They look at the statistics, they look at where they were at last year versus this year. But what really the one thing that they're not accounting for is they didn't play the same schedule that they're playing this year, where this year it's a juggernaut of the schedule and it's just going to get harder down the stretch.
Matt, that is a great point. I mean, even as the Jets are a team that we generally look at as a patsy, their record is good. They're on the rise and their defense is outstanding. So strength of schedule goes up. And the teams that were supposed to be good last year, Tennessee, they get them without A.J. Brown and Derrick Henry. The Falcons were obviously in a free fall. We didn't anticipate that. And at the end of the year, the chickens did come home to roost on the Patriots offense. But Phil's point about if it's Mac Jones, and I think it should be, until further notice, I would take him right through his 5th year. Don't pick up the 5th-year option, do whatever, franchise him, but I would anticipate that. I don't care about playmakers anymore. After watching this year, I would spend everything on offensive line. You can't, until you have an offensive line, until you have that spot locked down, you can't evaluate anything else. And they have to get a better coach in, because the guys who are the common denominators, Carmen Brasillo, Lombardi, who was he doing wide receiver, the quarterbacks, Philly?
He was doing wide receivers.
Okay. You had an assistant quarterback coach, though, in Hardigree, who's gone. and obviously Josh McDaniels, who is your lead quarterbacks coach and offensive coordinator. Those are your common denominators in terms of personnel when you refer to the talent has come in on the field that's better. So where do we go? What has gone out? What's the change? To Matt's point, yeah, schedule, but also these people who are the architects have also left. And what have they been replaced by? All right, let's get to this Cardinals matchup. If you're Arizona, you're looking at a Patriots team that has lost 2 straight, and your season is in disarray. You have a chance as the Cardinals to limit a team perhaps to under 20 points, to run on the Patriots the way other dual threat quarterbacks have done, and to maybe right your season a little bit. If I'm Arizona, I'm looking at this game as an opportunity to see the New England Patriots in December.
Yeah, the Cardinals are a mess right now. I mean, their coach and their quarterback are at odds. Their offense is not necessarily producing the way that people thought it would, although now that their receiving group looks the way that they thought it might before the season, maybe that changes some things down the stretch for them. But I mean, Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury going at it on the sidelines relatively consistently. You've got the in-season Hard Knocks thing where I think they're trying to make that look good for the Cardinals because, let's be honest, it's an HBO product, but it's run by the NFL, and they probably want other teams to be open to this down the line. But it's probably been really hard for the editors there to make sure that they're putting a buff and shine on this thing as well as they can, because it's been that bad. They have a lot of talent, Matt. I would argue that, they probably on paper have more talent than the Patriots do, but it's in disarray there. And the offensive side is really what's surprised me. Kyler Murray, as bad as people understand the Patriots offense has been, Kyler Murray's quarterback rating is the same as Mac Jones's this year. Mac Jones,
That's right,
in terms of yards per attempt, is significantly ahead of Kyler Murray, who's near the bottom of the league. So he's explosive, he's dynamic, he's a playmaker, but it's not going well there in Arizona.
It's not, and he averages 5.8 yards per pass, and that's what you're saying. He's down at the bottom of the league. They don't have those explosive plays, even though DeAndre Hopkins come back, and you can see that he's a playmaker. He's a guy. Kyler Murray's not having the year that they expected out of him, especially after the big contract. This is a team that won 11 games, and I know you talk about the early part of last year where they looked like the team to beat, and then all of a sudden they went on the skid, and that's kind of carried over into this year. They're in disarray. The coaching staff and the players seem like they're at odds, particularly the quarterback and Cliff Kingsbury, their head coach, the play caller of the team. They don't seem to be getting along very well. And maybe that there's a lot of discussion right there about, are we doing the right thing, this, that, and the other. Now, this still is a dangerous team. I like Kyler Murray. I think he's one of the more electrifying players in the league when he's on, but that's the issue that they've had. They've had just as much inconsistency with this team this year as what the Patriots have been through. And then from the defensive side of the ball, I think this is an opportunity for the New England Patriots. The reason I say that, look, Vance Joseph he's one of those guys that is going to come after you with heavy pressure. If you can pick it up, which again, I know that there's a lot of question marks there, but there'll be opportunities on the outside in this game to go make some big plays, some catch and run plays, and just the offensive line, this offensive unit has to be prepared for that in this game because they don't rush the quarterback very well with just 4 guys. What they have to do is help that pass rush by bringing extra guys off the line of scrimmage.
It's funny. We spend a lot of time all year long talking about must wins. And I usually go, come on, what are they going to do? Get relegated? There's no such thing as a must win. I don't even care what the situation is. Forget the Jets, forget the Dolphins, forget this. You can't lose to the Arizona Cardinals. You get to 7 losses, which means the best you can do is 10-7, and you have 4 games. Yeah, 4 more games, all against teams that are better than you. And I am including the Raiders. How do you like that? Guys, I like you. I like you.
I like you.
I have so much more stuff we could talk about. It's getting fascinating. See, I start to freeze on my Zoom sometimes, and the guys don't know when to jump in. So it gets to awkward pauses. Bye, everyone.